Great to be with you. I'm on, aren't I? We're going to wrestle with this really important topic. I want to jump straight into it, actually. It's the question of if God were there, you'd think he'd make himself more obvious. And it's a question I think that lots of people have. I think many people have. Whether you're a person who believes in God and follows God, or a person who's not sure there's a God there, either or, you'll end up having this kind of question. If you're a person who follows God, call yourself a Christian, religious, you'll find yourself asking in the midst of all the tough times of life, where is God? How come, if he were just a bit more obvious, I wouldn't struggle as much with what I believe in? How come others have had miraculous things and I've not had them? How come God is not more obvious? Why doesn't he turn up with a vision or a dream or something and just write something in the sky and then I'd find... But if you've not had a religious faith, you've not been in relationship with God, you'll have the same question. You'll find yourself going, well, how can I be expected to believe when it's not that obvious? I mean, if he's there, he's not made himself very clear. So one way or another, people are asking this question, and it's a very foundational question. It's a question that almost everyone is asking. And so because of that, we're going to tackle it first in this series. So the next bunch of weeks, as you picked up, that we're going to have these big questions we're going to wrestle with. This will be the one that sets us going. Now, what I want to do, though, as we tackle it, I'm going to make an introductory comment, offer some very brief thoughts, and then a long introduction before getting to the substance of it. You with me? So it's kind of introductory, and then we're going to get down to God, whether he's there or not. So let me give you the introductory comment. This whole time that we spend together tonight is going to start in one place and end in another. It's going to start with a question about God. You might have come tonight with a question about God. What's he doing? How come he's not as obvious as he could be? If you might even be thinking to yourself, if I were God, I'd do the whole thing very differently. How come he's not doing it the way I think he should? So it begins with this question about God, which are legitimate questions. I don't think they're wrong questions. But it ends in another place, a confronting place, because it ends up close to us. It ends up raising questions about us and how we function and how we think and how we engage. You come tonight to this kind of topic with the thought we're going to shine the spotlight on God, how he should be, what's he doing, and as the night progresses we'll find the spotlight actually turns back on us and asks questions of us. Now I'm conscious as we do that can be kind of touchy. You might have come along tonight, might have been invited by a friend, and you kind of reluctantly came, okay, I'm interested in finding out about this God, and you weren't aware that actually the whole thing's going to turn in on you. So I'm aware that can be a tricky thing. Good on you. I beg your patience as you come along. Yes, it will be tricky, but profoundly important to wrestle with, and I trust it's helpful for you. It does matter that we make sense of this. We need to make sense of ourselves in light of it all. These are really big, important issues. Now, to start the whole thing, what I want to do is show you a video about a famous atheist. And just to save me time with introductions, who has heard of Richard Dawkins? Oh, okay. Who has not heard of Richard Dawkins? No one's prepared to admit. Okay, a few people. Okay. Good. I won't spend much time on this. He's an evolutionary biologist. He's a prominent critic of Christianity and religion. And he's someone who has written famous books on critiquing Christianity. 3 million copies of The God Delusion have been sold. And the big thing he's into is being scientific, rational, and honest. So let's have a look at this video. Now, don't laugh, because he doesn't come off looking very well. But so let's pay him respect as we do this, but I'll pick up some thoughts. It doesn't go for very long, but just watch this.
What would it take for you to believe in God?
Well, I used to say it would be very simple. It would be... the second coming of Jesus, or a great big, deep, booming bass Paul Robeson voice saying, I am God and I created. But I was persuaded mostly by actually Steve Zara, who's a regular contributor to my website, richarddawkins.net. He more or less persuaded me that even if there was this booming voice and the second coming in clouds of glory, the more probable explanation is that it's a hallucination or a conjuring trick by David Copperfield or something. He made the point that a supernatural explanation for anything is incoherent, that it just doesn't sort of, it doesn't add up to an explanation for anything.
What would persuade you?
Well, I'm starting to think nothing would, which in a way goes against the grain, because I've always paid lip service to the view that a scientist should change his mind when evidence is forthcoming. The trouble is, I can't think what that evidence would look like.
Wow, did you hear what he just said? I've always paid lip service. I've always made a big thing of this idea of, as a scientist, you should change your mind if you get new evidence. And that is exactly right. If you're an honest inquirer and you get new evidence, you should change your mind. I thought they were guilty. I've got new evidence. I realise they're not. They're innocent. That's what you should do. But what we've just heard from him is that actually there's nothing he thinks could ever change his mind. Because whatever evidence that he ever saw, he is sure that he could reinterpret it so that it's not evidence at all. And so he knows that he's meant to receive evidence and change his mind in light of it, but he's not going to do that in this context. Now that's an extraordinary admission by someone who is critical of Christians that he sees as being blind, committed to ideologies and philosophies without any rational thought. And what we have here is the great rational proponent is himself committed to a particular position, whether or not the evidence presents. Now, here's the thing. What this means is that there's now no possibility that he could be convinced of the things of God, because he's shaped the whole discussion so that whatever evidence you present, he'll reinterpret. Which means he isn't open to even considering the evidence, which means the issue for him isn't a lack of God being visible. The issue isn't actually God is not visible enough. The issue is, for him, a lack of willingness to even consider the evidence that God might present to him. So what begins as this question about God not being, showing himself, revealing himself, being visible, at least for Richard Dawkins, devolves down into an issue of he doesn't want it to be true and so won't ever let it be true. It actually turns out to be him that's the issue, not the evidence. Do you see what I'm saying? Now, this is utterly profound. And it takes us into a serious concern in this discussion, because there'll be two sides of the issue we wrestle with. Could God make himself more obvious? What's God doing? How come God is doing it the way he is? There's an important question. But on the other side of things, would it matter if he did make himself more obvious? If the human heart is entirely unwilling to even look at the evidence, consider it and explore, then the question really isn't about God, it's about us and what's going on in our heart. You see how this starts with a spotlight on God, but actually begins to turn a spotlight back on ours. Now, as you're sitting here tonight, I pose this question for you. One of the ways to test whether you've drifted into a Richard Dawkins kind of place where it doesn't matter what the evidence is, you've committed already to a position. One of the ways to test that is this. If we could demonstrate the evidence does indicate there is a God that you owe your life to, if we could demonstrate that were true, would you bow the knee and let God be God? Would you? That's a moment of self-reflection. If God was shown to be true, would I let him be God in my life? Now, if you find it difficult to answer that question, then the whole discussion about the evidences for God and whether he's visible or not becomes a whole other issue. It's almost irrelevant to you, because you don't want to know. The issue isn't whether he's visible, it's whether you want him to be. So hold that thought, hang into that thought. Let me jump into the God side and make some preliminary comments there. The fact is, according to the Bible, now that's where we take it. I'm convinced that this is God revealing himself to it, making himself obvious to us. But according to the Bible, God is less visible than he otherwise could be. Big foundational point. He was more obvious in the Garden of Eden in the very beginning. He walked in the garden with Adam and Eve, our first parents. And we're told in the scriptures that he'll be much more obvious at the end of time when he returns. Every knee will bow and every tongue confess. He will be obvious, and Richard Dawkins, whether he likes it or not, will see, and it will be very clear. He was obvious. He will be very obvious. That is the case. And there are some passages like Micah chapter 3, Isaiah 45, Matthew chapter 11, which indicate that even in this time frame, where he is less obvious than he otherwise could be, he sometimes hides himself. He reveals himself to some, but not others. So we do have this situation where God is less visible than he otherwise could be. He could be more visible. Which begs the question, why? Why is he less visible than he could be? Why has he chosen not to be as visible as possible? You see the question for us. And the way I want to tackle it is by looking at a part of the Bible, Acts chapter 17 there, you'll only read it for us. Acts chapter 17, if you've got a Bible, turn it up, but otherwise just listen in if you're here new, of course, and fresh. Let me give you a quick bit of context. This is a sermon, a speech by one of the very first followers of the Lord Jesus Christ, someone who saw him resurrected from the grave, dead, buried, then alive again. This goes back to the very first people of the Christian faith. He's in Athens, which is where all the great thinkers, the great Greek philosophers hung out. And I don't know if you know the ancient world at all, but very often we imagine they're illiterate and ignorant and foolish and so on. No, they were very sophisticated, very clever, very thoughtful. And these philosophers used to hang into this place and sit and talk and push each other around. Well, Paul comes into this place to talk to the philosophers there, and he speaks. And before he actually gives the full message to them, he says, look, I've walked around, verse 23 there, and I've noted that you actually have many objects of worship. I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. So I see that you're very religious. You've got lots of gods and altars and temples in this city. You even have one to an unknown God, which means you're covering your bases, making sure in case you've missed one, you've got one there. You're very superstitious. And he says, well, what you don't know, I'm going to present to you and tell you what's the truth. Now, just again, a little bit of an introduction thought there. That can sound very arrogant. Yeah, there they go, those Christians. People have their religions. Christians come in and say, no, you're wrong, here's the truth. And it can sound very arrogant. And again, I'd invite you just to bear with me for a moment on this. As we consider what Paul actually teaches them, I hope you'll appreciate, and we'll see how we go, I hope you'll appreciate, but it's not arrogance that drives what he teaches. What he says is actually incontrovertibly true. See if we can get there. Look at verse 24. The God who, so he now proclaims to them, he says, the God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands. Now, what the Apostle Paul is talking about here is that if we are in touch with the true God, the God who is the creator of all things, the God who has made the very world that we live in, and every stone, rock, building, every cave, every piece, if God is the God who has made all of these things, then you can't actually cage him, you can't reduce him to a box, you can't keep him under lock and key because he made all of those things. He is the creator, which therefore means he must also be the Lord of heaven and earth. Now, do you see what I'm saying here? What the Apostle Paul is saying is it's superstitious to imagine you can craft an idol and God be contained in it. If he's the creator, he can't be contained. Do you see how this is just the truth? Paul is just playing out the logic of the reality of things. Come with me and look at verse 25. He goes further. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives us life, breath, and everything else. If he is God, we need him. He doesn't need us. If there is a God who is the one who's created all things, created us, we need him. He doesn't need us. And he certainly doesn't need us to give him food, or keep his idol upright, or make sure he has the sun when he needs. He is the God who is beyond all of these things. He's the one who gives us life, breath, and everything else. Now, this has massive implications. Just sit with this for a moment. This is all introductory. This has massive implications. Think of the logic of this. If there is a God, he must be this kind of God. If our existence and the created order can be traced back to a powerful first cause, a God, if God is that one who created everything from nothing, then he must be all-powerful and supreme in our existence. He must be over us and outside us and beyond us. He must be like that. Now, an illustration that many people have used over the centuries, and I find very helpful for many years, found this good to be an illustration, is the book illustration. Just imagine a book I'm going to read from in a little while, but just choose this one. Just imagine here is a book. Imagine all of the created existence that we live in is in this book, and there's an author who has written the story of existence, written the story of creation, written the story of us in it. He's made us up as characters within this story, and he's created the plot line of our lives and the plot of the existence. So this is the existence that the author has made, and we are in this as a character in it. Now, once you understand if that's the case, then there's a few things that follow. He is outside and over creation. He's the author of creation. He's the sovereign one. He can write it, he can change it, he can take words out of it, he can put new characters in it. It's his to do what he likes with. That's us, creation. And God is not just one of us, he's outside, over, beyond, other. He's the author of this existence. Now, from the perspective of us as characters within the book, just imagine now we have self-consciousness and we're in the book as living characters that he has written into existence. From the perspective of the characters in the book, from our perspective, talk of the author, if we're going to talk about the creator author, we must talk about him like Paul does. The author who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of everything, and he doesn't live in temples and buildings. It is superstitious, foolish, naive to imagine he's that. And he doesn't live in the pages of the book as if you can find him in the book. You see, we all have kinds of religions where you go and hug a tree and you're hugging God in some fashion. No. If the created order is made by the author, then just like in a book you can't find God in the book, you can't scratch the page to see if he's there, you can't cut it to find him somehow in it. He's the author of the book. He's outside, he's transcended, you see. Understanding this about God is he is the Lord. He's the one who gives us life, breath, and everything else. Him need us? Not at all. We need him. Now, I want to suggest to you there's a logic here about the nature of God that's unassailable. If we live in an existence that has been created by an all-powerful God, this is who this God is, he can't be contained. Now, this is all laying foundations. But then have a look there at verse 26. From one man, this God made all nations that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. This author of creation authored the existence of humankind and where humans will be. And all of this, he's the sovereign Lord. Now, verse 27 is our key one, though. God did this so that we would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. Now, here's a big twist in Paul's message, and it's not a logical consequence of there being a creator. What I mean by that is this. What Paul has done so far is just say if existence is created existence and there's a creator, this is the kind of being he must be, over the Lord, heaven and earth, ruling, sovereign. That's just a natural consequence, logical inference from the truth of him being God. But what he says there in verse 20 is not a logical inference. What he is bringing them is news that you only know from God, which is that God has done all of this so that we would seek him, perhaps reach out for him and find him. Now, this is news. This is telling us that the God who exists, says Paul, is the God who wants relationship with us. He is powerful and personal. And in his power, he made us that we might know him and have relationship with him, that we might reach out and find him, though he's not far from any one of us. It's not like it's hard to do, says Paul. It's not like he's so far away, it's tricky to do. Now, all of this brings us back to the original question. If that's what he wants, if he's created all things that we might know him and have relationship with him, why doesn't he make it easier? Why isn't he more obvious if that's what he wants? If he wants all people to believe in him, why wouldn't he make it so that we all do believe in him? If he wants us all to believe in him, why doesn't he write, "I love you" in the sky every time you doubt it? Why doesn't he answer your every prayer? Why doesn't he turn up in your bedroom when you're lonely? Why doesn't God make him so, if he wants us to know him, why doesn't he make it easier and more obvious? This is our question. But again, back to the point I made at the outset, there's two reasons we need to wrestle with here. One in God, one in us, in answer of that question. What's the answer in God? Why is it that God has not made it more obvious when he could have, beginning and end, he will? Why hasn't he made it more obvious now? Well, let me give you part of the answer and then we'll move to the next piece. And underline this. The key piece to the answer is, he's not an object of our study. He's not another creature. He's not like us. He's not at our beck and call. He doesn't owe us, we owe him. This is fundamental. This is fundamental. It flows from what he is and who he is as the creator, as the author of creation, as the one over all things. He's not at our beck and call. He's not someone you can put in a test tube and put the light on and then bring a judgment against. You know, people still think about God today. The vast majority of humans are convinced there's a divine being. Atheism, so Richard Dawkins is part of this atheistic movement that's in decline. I'll show you a little bit of this in a moment. Atheists are converting to Christianity. It's not a growing movement, it's a declining movement. But most people do think about God, but the most popular way to think about God, if they ever do think about God, is to think of him like a therapist, like a counsellor, like a mental health advocate. And the way people think like this is if God is there, then his job is to make my life better. If God is there, then the whole reason he should exist is to make everything in my life better, answer all my prayers. If anything happens to me, if it goes bad for me, he ought to rush in and fix it up and make it all good. There is something in us that keeps reducing God and minimising him and bringing him down so that in the end he's at our mercy, needing to answer to me for what he does and how he does it. How dare he do it the way he does? And we end up by nature doing this with God. I want to say one of the most critical things in our time is to hear this speech of Paul in Athens, is to hear that if God does exist, and this is what must be true of him, that he is the creator, he has the power, he is the Lord of heaven and earth, he is the author of all things, he is not part of what he has made, he is therefore supreme over all things. He does not live in temples built by human hands. He doesn't need anything from us. He's not served by human hands. He's the one who gives us life, breath and everything else. We need him, not he needs us. We find ourselves asking from within this creation, why hasn't he made himself more obvious? What's with him? We need to take great care. Every time you bring a question to God, do it, but do it with care. Just picture this for a moment to try and illustrate some of this. Imagine a group of year 8. Anyone from year 8 here tonight? I'm trying to be safe. Let's year 7. Year 7. No one's from year 7 here tonight. Year 7 Erina High School students. Am I safe? So year 7 Erina High School students. Now this is a fictional story. You'll see why it's fictional in a moment. They get together at lunchtime to think more deeply about justice and history. And they're wrestling with the British monarchy together in their free time at lunchtimes, right? So fiction, right? But anyway, they meet together regularly to talk about the British monarchy and how it's treated the Commonwealth of Nations and so on. And they've come to the determination that the British monarchy have been unjust. And so they write to the King of England to express their outrage. There's a group of students, they're all very headed up and they're kind of determined to do something about it, which is beautiful and good. And they write off to the king and they express their outrage and they demand that he presents himself to their student council one lunchtime on the 23rd of February. Now, I don't know whether that's a weekend or not, but that doesn't matter because this is the group of people who would meet even on the weekend to do this kind of thing, right? But they demand that he comes and presents himself to them. The king receives the letter. Now, think with me about his response. How do you think the King of England would respond to a letter like that? Who of us expects him to jump on the first plane, rush out to answer the charge, and hope he's let off by the Year 8 students? Hands up if you think he's going to do that. No one thinks he's going to do that. He might actually write a letter to them back. He might. But here's a further question. Think further about it. Who thinks he should, even though he's not going to, who thinks he should, though, jump on the first plane and come out and answer the charge of those Year 8 students? No one. Now, why don't we think he should? Because we have this intuitive sense that there's an ordered relationship between the students in Year 7, Year 8, and the King of England. And he doesn't answer to them and their charge. We just have this sense that we can think what we like, but that's not the way the relationship works. Now, the point I'm making here is, as creatures within a creation that has been made by the Creator, where he is the author and we are merely characters in the story he has written, he doesn't owe us. We owe him. And we need great humility as we come to these questions to wrestle with them, and recognition that he has the right to reveal himself to us as little or as much as he chooses. He's the one in charge of how much he shows us of himself. And we are at his mercy in terms of what he reveals of himself, whether he reveals of himself anything at all, how much he reveals. It's his decision to do that. We don't demand of him or require him. It's his right to make himself visible or hide as he sees fit. Okay, but still, if he wants everyone to believe, why doesn't he reveal himself more? But you've got all the introduction in place. Why doesn't God make himself more visible? Yes, okay, it's his right to make himself as visible as he chooses. He's chosen not to in this time. Why has he chosen not to as much as he will one day at the end? Why has he not revealed himself as... Here it is. Because he is determined to do something to us. His purpose in not revealing himself in the way that we might hope he would is to actually do something to us. And what is his purpose to do to us in all of this? Humble us. Humble us. Listen to this verse that comes here again, verse 27. God did all of this so that we would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from us. God has arranged the universe and the created order and revealed himself in the way he has so that we might do some work, so that we might get our act together and go, we need to reach out to him. We need to seek him and find him, because he is God, we're not. He's the sovereign Lord, we are the creature. You know, there's another place in the Bible, numbers of places that say something similar. Jeremiah chapter 29, listen to this. You will find me, says God, if you seek me with all your heart. You will find me if you seek me with all your heart. That is to say, you will find me if you want to find me. You'll find me if you sincerely seek me. You'll find me if you do it wanting to find the answer. You see what God is saying? We need to get the order right. It's him that we pursue. We don't sit back demanding that he gives us what we want. And the revelation, the process of this whole introduction is to turn the spotlight on us and say, If you genuinely want to find God, you will. You will. Because the evidence of God is there to be seen, clear as day. If you want to find him, he's there to be found. The whole key thing falls down on the question of whether you want to find him or not. Do you want him to be God in your life or not? He isn't as obvious as he could be, as he one day will be, yes, but he has left enough evidence of himself that if you want to find him, you will find him. If you sincerely are pursuing him, you'll find him. Let me take you through some of that evidence that's there today. But I want to do it under this massive introduction because it's his purpose to reveal himself as much as he chooses, as little, and where he chooses. We've got to actually face the fact that where he's revealed himself is where we need to look. All of this is meant to do something to us. But let me take you through some of the evidence of his hand and in our world. The evidence of God is actually everywhere. It's there to be seen, plain as day, if you want to see it. It's there in two particular chunks, two big packages of information. It's there in just the nature of the created order that we live in, and it's there in a very special place where God has deliberately and unmissably shown himself. It's there in the whole of the created order, but it's there in one special place, unmissable. Let me take you through these two pieces. The world around us, the scriptures tell us that the heavens declare the glory of God. When you look up into the heavens, you see the glory of the Creator. A moment's reflection on our world, the world we live in, tells you that there is a designer, there's a God, there's a creator. Let me give you a quote here. It comes from Einstein. Do you remember that genius, brilliant guy? He says, "We are in the position of a little child entering a huge library filled with books in many languages. The child knows someone must have written those books." Einstein, he says, the child may not be able to articulate why and how and all the details, but walking into a library, even a child knows that those books didn't just happen by accident. There's too much detail. There's too much order. There's too much complexity. There's too much wisdom. It didn't just happen by accident. It must have happened by design. You see, it is there to be seen, the created order around us. Let me give you another quote. It's from Freeman Dyson. This guy's a theoretical physicist. He was at Princeton University. He was given a lifelong tenure. This is a super smart guy. "The more I examine the universe and study the details of its architecture, the more evidence I find that the universe, in some sense, knew we were coming." It knew we were coming. The universe had a design about it, a shape, a structure that was put in place by someone. Now, you can see this kind of thing in the macro, and science has taken us very deep in recent decades into the macro details. It's a thing called fine-tuning. Fine-tuning. I don't know if you can chase all this stuff I've got, but I don't know if you've heard this before. But scientists have determined that the universe is expanding at a certain rate, and they've been able to trace back the expansion to the point where it began, the Big Bang. And the Big Bang, they're telling us, happened billions of years ago. But the Big Bang, one of the critical things that scientists have determined is that when an explosion, the Big Bang, occurs, there's forces that cause expansion to happen, but within the expansion are also forces that cause contraction to happen. The gravitational pull of various bodies, for instance, the atomic powers and the force within strong and weak atomic forces. These kind of things pull things back together. For the universe to not just blow up and completely expand into nothing, it needs to have a very particular gravitational power to bring things together so that as it expands, particles come together into planets. And the precision of that power to push out and the power to bring together is finely tuned. Scientists estimate that if the gravitational power was 1/billionth of a gram more powerful, the whole universe would collapse in on itself. 1/billionth of a gram more powerful. The fine-tuning that enables the universe to expand and yet come into planets and establish themselves. And so our own solar system, the tuning that's occurred here in the context of the sun that we have and the size of the sun and the heat of the sun and the distance that the earth is away from the sun is necessary to ensure the kind of heat that we get. The fact that we've got a moon the size that it is with the distance of an orbit around us. The fact that the planet that we're on has a certain mix of chemicals and oxygen and carbon and so on and so forth. And the fact that the crust of the planet is a certain thickness and no thicker. The fact that the axis is tilted so that we get the seasons we get. All of this is incredibly fine-tuned. It's never been found anywhere else in the universe, search though we might. These things speak. They're like the Einstein comment where as you come into a library, there's the design and the complexity, the books that just a child knows. This didn't just happen. There's a beauty too to all of this. When accidents and big bangs, explosions happen, they are never beautiful, except there's been explosions you've been watching in recent weeks that have been beautiful. When were those explosions beautiful? What explosions are beautiful? Fireworks. Now think with me about most explosions by their nature are not beautiful. When your car blows up, you're not going to stand back and say, gee, that's beautiful, right? Explosions by their very nature are haphazard and random, but there is a certain kind of explosion that has a beauty about it. And you know how that fireworks is beautiful? Because someone designed it to give the explosion beauty. The Big Bang, how is it that it has produced not just random chaos, but beauty? How has it created beauty? Because there's a designer that's brought it about. The skies proclaim God's handiwork. Humankind, as we look on, see that the things that have been made declare to us that there's a God of divine power and supernatural being. Romans chapter 1. And humankind, when you look at humans, humans of all the animals, we're not just different by degree, we're different by order. We're not just a little bit different to chimps, we're of a different order of humankind, of animal. Our sense of morality, our sense of truth and falsehood, good and evil, these things aren't just useful categories that serve evolutionary processes. Evolutionary processes, as we're told, is all about the survival of the fittest. The strong survive, the weak get eaten. That's nature red in tooth and claw. That's the nature of the world around us, except for humans. We are the one animal that actually fights for the rights of the weak and finds it immoral to have the powerful survive and the weak get crushed. Where does that come from, that morality? Is it just there to serve evolutionary processes? No, because we're convinced that humans actually have innate rights. If we're in an accident, there's no such thing as innate rights. Where is this? Love. These things are... Look, A.N. Wilson, I've got another quote for you. A.N. Wilson's a very famous philosopher, if you're in the world of philosophy. He converted to Christianity. He was an atheist, converted in 2009. He's another one of them. And listen to what he says. Materialistic atheism says we are just a collection of chemicals. It has no answer whatever to the question of how we should be capable of love or heroism or poetry if we are simply animated pieces of meat. And the fact that you experience these things tells the child, I'm in a library full of books that was written by a designer. This world is designed. Then there's human consciousness. I don't know if you've thought about this kind of thing, but Thomas Nagel is an atheistic, he's still an atheist as far as I know, but he's a philosopher in the United States, a very famous philosopher who's written a book called Mind and Cosmos. And the book Mind and Cosmos caused such a stir against the atheistic philosophical world because he was perceived to have betrayed his atheism. And listen to what he says. Consciousness is the most conspicuous obstacle to the comprehension... Wow. Is everyone with me? Consciousness is the most conspicuous obstacle to the comprehensive naturalism that relies only on the resources of physical science to explain reality. What has he just said? The fact that you are conscious, the fact that you have a mind that cannot be reduced to matter, the fact that you have a self-consciousness, he says, that reality is the biggest obstacle to just thinking the world exists by virtue of pure matter. The book Mind and Cosmos actually makes the point that because human mind is something, it cannot just be reduced to neurons firing and physical explanations. He's come to the conclusion it must be a thing itself, immaterial mind. And he says, therefore, that the created order must have not only physical matter, but a mind that exists alongside that. We're now talking about God. And he's struggling to continue with his atheism. But further, next slide. Ayaan Hirsi Ali. She was a Muslim from Somalia, I think, that became an atheist, became very good friends with Richard Dawkins, the video we saw earlier. She's very good and continues to be good friends, and spent time with them in their travels spruiking atheism. She's just become a Christian. And then her husband, she's got married, he's become a Christian. The world's most famous historian, an atheist, has become a Christian. She says atheism failed to answer a simple question: what is the meaning and purpose of life? A child walks into the library of the existence that we have and sees that there's design and order and love and beauty and morality and right and wrong, true, false. It sees all the richness of the fine-tuning and goes, this didn't happen. This isn't an accident. God has left his fingerprints all over the creation he's made. It's been said by that scientists needs to be given 5 free miracles before it then avoids talking about miracles. It needs 5 free ones that we quietly don't mention, and then it can get on pretending they don't exist. And the 5 free miracles are that something came from nothing. How did that happen? No one knows. It's a miracle that there's nothing and then something. Second miracle, how order came from chaos. How life came from non-life. How did we go from rocks to life? How consciousness came from non-consciousness. And how transcendence came from consciousness. How in the human animal, our consciousness has given birth to transcendence. That is to say, you will not see a crowd of meerkats sitting around in the Sahara Desert or wherever they hang out, looking at the sunset with a drink in their hand saying, why are we here? Do you know, what's life about? But humans do that. We're the ones that have this transcendent sense of what is life about? Where did that come from? God has not left himself without testimony. If you reach out, he's there to be found. The evidence is all around us if you're willing to see it. But more, he has chosen to do something more directed, more explicit, more unmissable. He has spoken words through humans, and not just kind of morality and philosophy. He's spoken prophetic words centuries before something happened, so that when it happened, we'd realised he was in touch with all that was happening. Tested. But he's done even more than that. He's come in his own person. In the most astonishing miracle, the invisible God became visible at a time and place of his choosing. He became man. He stepped into his creation in the person of Jesus. The author of the story wrote himself into being one of the characters in the story. Mind-blowing. The unique claim of the Christian faith, it's the one religion that says this, that God became a creature in verifiable time and space. You can go back to the time and look at the historical evidences. Now, why did he do that? Because he wants us to know him. He came to pay the price that needs to be paid for us to be forgiven in his death on the cross. But he came to make it possible that we might see him in a very unmissable way. And he gave the stamp of his unmissable power in it all by 3 days after the death of Jesus, bringing him back to life again in the resurrection. This is unique of all religions. God has made himself be seen, not so much that it's impossible to ignore him. If you don't want God to be God, you can close your eyes to it. But he's done enough that if you do sincerely want to know that he's there, you can find him. The evidence is written all over the place. The key issue here is your heart, whether you want to find him. And this matters a great deal. There is a massive amount at stake in all of this, and so I'm going to finish with a lot of emotion. Because this isn't just academic, this isn't just science, this is meant to touch your heart, and I'm going to read a poem to you. And I'm going to be in touch with my feminine side, so I'll probably tear up as we go, all right? You ready for this? Okay. Yeah, chuck the slide up, Kelsey, if you could. At the end of time, billions of people were scattered on a great plain before God's throne. Most shrank back from the brilliant light before them, but some groups near the front talked heatedly, not with cringing shame, but with belligerence. Can God judge us? How can he know about suffering? Snapped a pert young brunette. She ripped open a sleeve to reveal a tattooed number from a Nazi concentration camp. We endured terror, beatings, torture, death. In another group, a black boy lowered his collar. What about this, he demanded, showing an ugly rope burn. Lynched for no crime but being black. In another crowd, a pregnant schoolgirl with sullen eyes said, "Why should I suffer?" she murmured. "It wasn't my fault." Far out across the plain were hundreds of such groups. Each had a complaint against God for the evil and suffering he had permitted in his world. How lucky God was to live in heaven where all was sweetness and light, where there was no weeping or fear, no hunger or hatred. What did God know of all that men had been forced to endure in this world? For God leads a sheltered life, they said. So each of these groups sent forth their leader, chosen because he had suffered the most. A Jew, a black person, a person from Hiroshima, a horribly deformed arthritic, a thalidomide child. In the centre of the plain, they consulted with each other. At last, they were ready to present their case. It was rather clever. Before God could be qualified to be their judge, he must endure what they had endured. Their decision was that God should be sentenced to live on earth as a man. Let him be born a Jew. Let the legitimacy of his birth be doubted. Give him a work so difficult that even his family will think him out of his mind when he tries to do it. Let him be betrayed by his closest friends. Let him face false charges, be tried by a prejudiced jury and convicted by a cowardly judge. Let him be tortured. And at last, let him see what it means to be terribly alone. Then let him die. Let him die so that no doubt can be around that he died. Let it be a great host of witnesses to verify that he died. As each leader announced his portion of the sentence, loud murmurs of approval went up from the throng of people assembled. When the last had finished pronouncing sentence, there was a long silence. No one uttered another word. No one moved, for suddenly all knew that God had already served his sentence. He's already come into our world to make himself visible at his time and at his place, at his choosing. But he came to suffer with us, to come alongside us. Such is his grace and kindness. He came to make it evident that he is there for all who would seek him out. Came to die for us. He came to rise again. And by that resurrection, he has been appointed judge of the living and the dead. We all one day will stand before that God. And if you find yourself thinking, I can say to him, it was just too hard to know God, you should have made yourself more obvious. The Son will stand there with the scars that he received by making himself visible and say, be gone. Because this wasn't about me, it was about you and your heart and your stubborn pride. There's a great deal at stake in all of this. God has made himself not as visible as he could, but he has made himself eminently visible enough to find him if you want to. Do you want to? Do you want to? Is the question. Let me pray. Well, our great God, we're dealing with heavy things, big things, and we do ask, please, that you might stir our hearts to want to find you. And I'd pray for those amongst us who are wrestling with these things that you would stir their hearts to want to find you in sincerity, that they would reach out, they would knock on that door, and that, Lord, you promised you would open that door. And we pray that those who are seeking you would find you even tonight, but over the next days and weeks, please bring these people into the great humility of seeing that we serve you, and yet you died for us. Please help us find you, we ask, in Jesus' name. Amen.